Welcome to the Retirement Spy. I'm your host, Duncan, and our purpose at the Retirement Spy is to help you build a community around planning for retirement non-financially so that we can all prosper in retirement, knowing what to do and how to do it best. Today, we are very happy to have a special guest, my friend Dave Wilkinson, who is the CEO of the Atlanta Police Foundation. The uniqueness about Dave is his background and having had the ability to retire early but choosing not to. Dave is one of America's leading law enforcement professionals. Before joining the Atlanta Police Foundation, he served for 22 years in the United States Secret Service, where he served as a special assistant agent in charge of presidential protection under both Presidents Bill Clinton and George W. Bush. He was special agent in charge of Office of Investigations and special agent in charge of the Secret Service's Georgia's division. He was awarded the Secret Service Distinguished Service Award from President Bush due to his meritorious actions during September 11th, 2001. And I'm sure Dave's got some great stories there. Dave, welcome.
Well, thank you, Duncan. I'm glad to be with you.
So interesting about Dave, when you come out of the Secret Service, there's a time period in the Secret Service where you bow out. What do most Secret Service agents do? When is that age usually, and what do they usually do after that? Do they go off in the sunset, or what's the next step for Secret Service?
That's a great question, Duncan. And most Secret Service agents come on the job probably 30, 35 years of age. And they're eligible to retire after 20 straight years or the age of 55. And most of them will go off and take a role as a corporate security director and maybe spend 5 or 10 years in that role before they retire it probably in the early 60s. I was a unique case where I actually was playing semi-pro baseball, college baseball, and all that. I was only 22 years old and was hired by the Secret Service. In fact, my whole career, I never met another agent that was that young that was hired. Like I said, the average is typically more about age of about 30. Anyway, so I came on the job when I was 22, and so after 20 straight years of service at the Secret Service, 9 of which I spent at the White House, I was eligible to retire. So at the age of 42, I was certainly eligible to retire and able to go out and have a whole nother career. Now, I ended up through a commitment I made to the president to come to Atlanta, serve as the principal federal official for Homeland Security, and to run the G8 summit down in Sea Island, that I would see those through in late 2004. So by the time I actually left the Secret Service, I had 22 years on, but still I was 44 years old and had every intention of going on and having another full 20-year career.
So I'm going to really brag about the city of Atlanta and what they did to lure you to be the Police Foundation director. And this is a great story in itself, but I know our listeners would want to hear about your actions and what happened on 9/11 when you were with President Bush. Share with us, if you can, what you can tell us about that day for our audience, who I'm sure are drooling to hear a little bit about this.
Yeah, well, thank you, Duncan. It's hard to imagine now. It's been almost 24 years since that fateful day, and as you can imagine, it was another typical day in the U.S. Secret Service with the president. We were in Sarasota, Florida, at a golf and tennis resort. Got up that morning, took the president out for a jog. Eddie Morenzel and myself were the 2 supervisors. Eddie, the deputy special agent in charge, me, the assistant special agent in charge. And so I took the president out for a jog, and then we headed over to an elementary school. Just another typical day. We've done thousands and thousands of those. But as we were arriving in the elementary school, it came over our radios that a accident just taken place in New York, and the president needed to be briefed by Condoleezza Rice, who was not with us on the trip. So we needed to take the president to the holding room. So we took the president to the holding room, which in this case was just simply a teacher's lounge in the elementary school. And of course, when we walked in there, first thing we saw on the TV, like everyone else, was the first plane hit the building. As you can imagine, we all expected that was either an accident, or it was an individual act of terrorism, or it was some sort of act of suicide by a pilot or something to that effect. It was first reported that it looked like it was a small commuter plane. So that's what all that was originally thought. And so you can imagine, assuming it was probably an accident and having no intelligence information whatsoever, as you can imagine on a Secret Service trip like that, we've got CIA, we've got national security folks, everywhere with us to give the president the latest and greatest about anything that's going on in the world. And I can tell you today for a fact that no one had any clue what was going on, right? And so the president and I went on into the classroom. The president began reading to the kids, and that's when the second plane hit the building about halfway through that, the president reading to the kids. And so immediately, as you can imagine, I began having conversations with Eddie Marenzo, the other supervisor, and the others in the room about whether we should evacuate, whether there was a direction of interest toward the president there in Sarasota. We determined there wasn't. We also knew we didn't know what we didn't know. So we basically began our exit strategy. And then we realized, as we were talking about all this, the president's the only one that doesn't know the second plane has hit the building and know that this situation has escalated. Then eventually, Andy Card, the chief of staff, as you all seen on all the news footage, walked in, whispered in the president's ear that the second plane is hit. So there's a lot to unpack here, but as you can imagine, eventually, within the next 15 minutes or so, we evacuated the school, got the president Air Force One, flew him up the highest levels we possibly could fly so that the Air Force One countermeasures would be in place and so the president would be safe until we knew what the hell was going on. So that's probably the one takeaway for your callers is that we got him up in the air and we got him up as high as Air Force One will fly, which is higher than other jets for that reason, because we didn't know what was going on and we wanted the president to be able to continue to function as a president of the United States. And so, of course, there's a lot other stuff to unpack from that, from Flight 93 and many other things I'm happy to talk about. But otherwise, it was a day that I'm most proud of only because I saw firsthand the military, the Secret Service, all our law enforcement partners perform extremely well and admirably throughout that day. And so, it's something obviously that that preparation and the execution of the security plan that I always appreciate was done right.
It was going on that day, and maybe we'll have the benefit of having you back on our podcast to talk about that because I've heard you tell the stories and you do such a wonderful job, and there's just so much entertainment there alone, and I hope you're going to write a book one day because there are a lot of great stories that we've heard. Question, you could have retired after the Secret Service. You weren't ready for retirement. You were being offered a big job before what I call the downtown mafia of Atlanta came to you to try to convince you to be head of our police foundation. Kind of tell me about what was offered to you in particular, but what job opportunities usually offered from people like other Secret Service agents like you, and what your consternation was when you went down the path of retirement versus the job you're offered versus where you are today.
Well, thanks for that question. As you know, as I got ready to retire, I was a senior executive, which is the highest pay grade in the Secret Service. And I was just barely 44 years old. I don't even think I'd turned 44 yet. And so therefore, I was extremely marketable. As you can imagine, Secret Service agents get quite really good jobs in the Fortune 500 as chief security officers and other leadership roles. So I was very highly marketable. And that was the direction I was planning to go, Duncan. I mean, I was getting ready to turn 44, and I was ready for the next big challenge, go out and conquer the corporate world. But as I verbally accepted this position in Dallas, working for a big Fortune 50 company to be their chief security officer and sort of run their global sort of security, the one thing that sort of hit me was that this may sound a little bit corny, but throughout my 22 years in the Secret Service, I became more and more about the culture of public service and how that made me feel, a public servant, serving the citizens of the United States and serving the folks at the White House and all that. So again, it sounds a little corny, but it really kind of took over. And as I started thinking about taking this job and moving to Dallas, I was excited about it on one hand, but it felt a little hollow to me. It felt like I wasn't going to have that same day-to-day satisfaction. Many of my counterparts in the Secret Service that retired, when I'd see them, they're making big money, they're in big jobs now, and I'd say, how you like it? And they go, well, it's okay. I mean, it's for the money, right, kind of thing. And they would let me know it was really good money, but it wasn't really that motivational. And so I was sort of a little skeptical anyway, but I was set to move and take on this role. And then when the business leaders of Atlanta approached me about creating a police foundation, I said to them this one thing: I'm not interested. I'm moving to Texas. I said, however, if you're going to do that, you got to understand a couple of things. One is that it needs to be a public-private partnership with the task of creating the public safety strategy for your city. Police agencies are so overwhelmed, so understaffed, they have a tendency to be overwhelmed with the day-to-day operations and not a lot of time for strategic planning. Where a public-private partnership can come in with the business leaders, bring your business acumen, your subject matter expertise, your business practices, and really be able to create a cutting-edge security plan for your city. What I didn't anticipate, Duncan, is the mayor of Atlanta and the business leaders, led by several of the CEOs here, got so excited about that idea that they continued to come to me saying they wanted me to take the role. And I continued to say, no, I'm moving to Texas. I said, but I will help to find you the right person if you're serious about what I think you should create. The bottom line is this: the more and more I talked to these business leaders, the more I saw committed the city of Atlanta was, the business leaders of Atlanta, our mayor, who was a wonderful mayor at the time, Shirley Franklin, that I got more and more motivated about doing just that. And again, that public sector feeling, running a big 501c3 nonprofit here in Atlanta, or was little at the time, but it's a little bit larger now, sort of became very motivating to me. And so at the end of the day, I finally made the decision to pull out of the corporate job in Texas and to stay right here in Atlanta to run the Atlanta Police Foundation.
As a we need to take one step back. I think your profile was highly defined in Atlanta and Georgia leaders. I forgot this. Right after you retired from the Secret Service, you were approached to head security for the G5 summit in Sea Island in 2004. Tell me about that, because I think that was really putting your profile and your abilities on the map. It's certainly to Georgia leaders, being able to see how you operated in the spotlight of an international table to really put forth a good presence, not only for the United States and hosting the G5, but for the state of Georgia.
Well, actually, that happened before I retired from the Secret Service. So the president appointed me as the principal federal official to run the G8 summit in Sea Island. So I basically was the principal federal official for the region, which is a Homeland Security appointment. I was the lead for the G8 summit in Sea Island, and I ran the Secret Service operations for the state of Georgia as kind of my day job. And running that G8 summit was part of that. And so it was sort of the cherry on top, Duncan, as you can imagine, because I had done every major event you could possibly think of with the president. I've been to every country, every city, everything you can think of. I spent almost 9 years on the presidential detail of my 22 years. And that's sort of cruel and unusual punishment, as I like to jokingly say, because your average agent that serves on the president's detail is typically about a 4 to 5 year assignment at the most, because the travel is so intense. It's just too much of a hardship on your family. You're gone all the time, right? But I got promoted a couple of times, and you know what it's like when you get promoted, you're expected to give another year or two. And so that's what I did. But no, the G8 summit was the last thing I did in the U.S. Secret Service. And when the summit ended, the after action reports were filed and all that. That was when I left and began to plan my retirement from the U.S. Secret Service and ended up taking over the Police Foundation.
I'd imagine, with what I know you went through during that time with the summit, that's the definition of burnout right there. I would have said, I'm done after all those responsibilities and everything you took on. My first thought is, at least put me at the beach with a bucket of beer and a cigar for a month.
So funny, Duncan, because I get asked that all the time, and maybe I'm just wired different than other people, right? But I thrive off that. The intensity of a security planning for the president of the United States, high stakes, a lot of pressure, nerves. It would be like you're pitching at Dodger Stadium, in the seventh game of the World Series, a typical event, right? And I use that as a baseball reference, being a baseball guy. But anyway, but super intense, super nerve wracking. Everything's a big deal. Attention to detail, no missed, detail goes unchecked. And so that pressure was there, but I sort of thrived off that. I kind of loved that. I loved every bit of that. It made it even seem more important to me, right? Made that we're doing something so important that everybody, and you're sitting there in meetings with the highest level of security folks from around the country and around the globe and all that. So when I came to the G8 summit, this is kind of like the biggest event I'd ever taken on, right? But I'd done many events, and it was that next big step, but I loved it. I loved all, but now I'm taking it from a different level. I'm also representing Homeland Security. I'm basically representing the state of Georgia, working with the governor for the state, working with many other governors. I'll tell you a quick thing. Between Sea Island and Savannah, there were only 1,600 sworn officers. When we did the first security plan, we needed 21,000 security folks.
Oh my God.
So we needed 21,000, we had 1,600. So the president went to work with Congress and under the Iraqi bill appropriated $57.6 million to hire police officers from other districts. And the reason that was important, because I spent upwards of a year traveling around a little bit in the country, getting officers from Jacksonville and Fort Lauderdale and Miami and Charlotte and every major city you can think of to come to Atlanta to be part of the security plan for the G8 summit. And of course, the $57 million was used to pay them while they were here. So all that was different, right? Normally I go to a big city and the event's right there in the city, and we do that. So it was an unbelievably challenging, complex security plan in itself. But the logistics of the plan was absolutely off the charts, right? It was absolutely off the charts. And so we had more moving pieces than you can imagine playing. Imagine just the G8 summit itself. You got the 8 world leaders there, and then we bring in the 22 African presidents. They came in to visit with the G8 leaders. All of this takes place, and we have Savannah 90 miles away from Sea Island, and we're trying to coordinate all of this happening at the same time. Planes, trains, automobiles for sure. And so, anyway, it's a very challenging time, but I really thrived on all that and loved it.
How was Sea Island chosen? I mean, I would imagine this is an important venue. So, as I
Well,
know, Sea Island, it's easy to secure because it's an island, right? But what other cities were in contention, and why Sea Island, if you remember?
well, I don't think the president would mind me saying this. It's certainly not classified information in any ways. First of all, it wasn't easy to secure. Now, when you think about it being on an island, you think, oh, that's an easy way to secure it. But now, obviously, you have threats from land, sea, and air, of course. You have a location where everybody in the world knows where the world leaders are. It's not like in a big city where they can kind of be in the mix somewhere. Everybody knows they're right there in Sea Island. So it had its own security challenges. You can imagine the Navy and Coast Guard, everybody was involved. But the logistics of it, again, Duncan, were the absolute nightmare. Trying to get officers, military, in and out of Sea Island, over the bridge, over the causeway. And of course, this was right in the middle of the protests regarding Occupy Wall Street, Occupy Atlanta. So we had a big protest going on during all of this as well, protesting the G8 summit. So it was really a big deal. But you asked a more specific question: how was the G8 location picked? And there's a very interesting story. Your listeners probably will be surprised to hear this. So it came down to between the Greenbrier in West Virginia and Sea Island. And you'd have to ask the president to get his own take on this. But I'd like to say we picked it for security reasons, but that wouldn't be honest. The president picked Sea Island because that was where his parents had their honeymoon.
Wow, at the cloister.
At the cloister. So he thought, now again, this is me speaking for him. You'd have to ask him directly this. But I think that had a part to play in it. A guy by the name of Bill Jones at Sea Island, who was a fabulous guy to work with, and open, laid out the red carpet for us in every way. That had something to do with it. Just the hospitality of the folks at Sea Island, all that decided. Just as sort of a funny side note, I think in the end, what won out was Barbara and George had their honeymoon there back in whenever it was, 1940s, or whenever they were married.
Wow. What a great backstory that a lot of people haven't heard. And I would imagine if the president wants to pick a place for the G8 summit, the Secret Service is probably pulling their hair out saying, boss, I wouldn't have picked that spot. And they say, well, just do it, Dave. You guys.
Well, we said when he picked his ranch in Crawford, Texas. So we've never had a president. I was with President Clinton all those years as well. And I love the guy, and he did a great job as our president. They both did. But President Clinton always tried to make it a little hard on us, right? He always did. But that's okay. Again, that was part of the challenge. So everything we did, we had to create a scenario where the president was in a safe environment, but then yet at the same time, he could live his life as normal as one would expect him.
And I would imagine of all the presidents we've known over the years, I'm sure some are more apt to others to be difficult, more so than not, by their nature. Enough said, right?
Well, and it's a very friendly relationship. The Secret Service, the presidents, I think I can speak for all three of the presidents I was with, and that's Bush 41, Clinton, and Bush 43, loved the Secret Service, loved the relationship. They saw our guys as the most professional, the most buttoned up, the most squared away guys you could possibly have. So it was a great relationship, but I think partly because the Secret Service agents were one of the few people at the White House that would say no to the president. Right? I mean, if they had to, right? They say, no, we're not going to do that. We can't do that. That's not safe. We're not going to do that. And I'm not sure presidents here know very often, as you can imagine. And so I think there was a mutual respect there, right? And so, Bush 41, Clinton, and then Bush 43, I can promise you this, and all your listeners know this, regardless of your politics, all three of those men did a hell of a job for this country, because I watched it, saw it every day, and they worked early morning hours to late hours every day. And I think your listeners would be impressed by the quality of effort, right? Forgetting the politics a minute, the quality of effort to run this country. What all went into it, and the effort they all gave. And so I was certainly proud to be part of that.
I was amazed at some point. I saw a picture of every president in recent memory at the beginning of their term and after their term. And with the exception of one president that I'll laugh at, every one of them started with normal hair, and at the end, their hair was white. Jimmy Carter with red hair to white hair. The only exception was Ronald Reagan. And I think
Yeah,
that's being an actor that he
yeah.
probably put treatment in his hair, but every one of them. And I think that goes just to the stress level, not only of your job to protect the president, but the stress level of being president of the United States and going to gray hair, even when you're a relatively young man. I'm thinking of a Barack Obama, certainly got a little salt and pepper after his term in office as well.
Well, you don't notice it when you're with them. You notice that when you're a viewer on television. But when you're with them every single day, you don't really notice that until after the fact.
Yeah.
And you're with, one of the presidents and you see a video from 3 or 4 years ago and then you see the difference. But during the day, you don't even think about it. In fact, it's kind of startling. You go, wow, I didn't realize he'd aged that much, and I see him every day.
You're both comparing your gray hairs. You're like, hey, Mr. President, look what my hair looked like before I started serving you.
They were very different people in a lot of ways, and their families were all different in ways. But again, just great men, great honor to have served with each of them. President Bush, 43. We mentioned 9/11. I could not be more proud of, the way he handled things that day, the way he led the United States and this country through that on 9/11. Again, politics aside, anyone that had been with us on Air Force One on that day in 9/11 would have been proud of the president and proud of the whole apparatus of how we operated.
Question. You have a lot to be proud of, Dave. The Atlanta Police Foundation is literally the icon of public safety in the United States of America. We have Israelis who want to come train with our police department or our police foundation to understand what we're doing. We have major cities weekly, I'm sure, saying, how do we create a police foundation like you have? Tell us from the origins of the police foundation when you started in 2005 to today, what we've strive to do, and where you've ended today with, and I'll take the mystery out of it, $130 million capital campaign to build a preeminent public training facility in the United States.
Well, Duncan, thanks for that. And as you can imagine, we started from pretty much nothing. But the secret sauce to our success really is, bringing together corporate leaders, philanthropic leaders, academic leaders, all together and getting them involved. Right? There's an old saying in fundraising that if you ask someone for money, they're going to give you advice. If you ask them for advice, they're going to give you money. Right?
Yeah.
And when folks first told me that when I took over this, never having worked at a nonprofit, I laughed a little bit thinking it's cute. But it really turned out to be 1,000% true, right? You got to get people involved. You got to get them engaged. You got to ask their ideas, their suggestions. If we've got to solve a technology issue in Atlanta, we'll bring technology folks from Coca-Cola and UPS and all these companies into the room and try to help us solve that. And so when we first started, just to show you the success and how we've become in just sort of 19 years now, the biggest, not only police foundation, but the biggest public-private partnership probably in the world for public safety, is we started with a very modest 3-year strategic plan, capital campaign to raise $3.5 million. And our most recent capital campaign was to raise $90 million. And we raised $166 million in 3 years. And that's to execute all the programs and initiatives in the city of Atlanta. We're in the process getting ready to launch the next big plan. And when I say capital campaign, strategic plan or capital campaign, those two terms can be used interchangeably. Because the idea is to create a strategy, make sure we have one plan for our city, not 3 or 4 plans. We have one plan. The business community, the corporate community, the philanthropic community, the academic community, the law enforcement community, everybody is focused around one plan. That's, again, the secret to our success. And then once we have one plan and we get all these donors, if you will, supporters, stakeholders, if you will, involved, get their ideas, their suggestions, their thought, make sure we're doing everything we can to address the very simple mission of creating a safer city. I say all the time to business leaders in Atlanta, we don't ever want to make it more complicated than that. We don't want to get all up in the mission, vision, goals, all that is any more than we have to. It's about making the city safer. And it's all about what can we do to make our city safer. So every community in Atlanta, every one of your viewers, whether you're a big supporter of the police or you're a critic of the police, you want the same two things. You want a safe community and you want good policing. And that's what we do at the Atlanta Police Foundation. We're making sure we do this for the citizens. I should have said this in the beginning. We don't work for the mayor. We don't work for the police chief. We don't work for the corporations. We work for the citizens of Atlanta to make the city of Atlanta a safer city. It's the vehicle. Another way I like to say is when you're watching the news and you think something's going on with crime or whatever, and you're concerned, you go, boy, I wish I could get involved and help them fix that. That's how you do that. Get involved in the Police Foundation because we're creating the strategies to fix all that.
There's so many programs. You can sometimes get confused if you don't know what the Police Foundation is doing. Some people are just not well informed. They're like, well, I give taxes that pay for my policing. I don't need to give money to a 501c3 to do what we do. So many programs at the Police Foundation. Give us some highlights of how our money that we raise is spent for the betterment and public safety.
Well, thank you, Duncan. There's a lot to unpack there. We have about 25 programs, right? But as you can imagine, let me start with this latest big initiative that many of your viewers and listeners have heard about is this new training center. The training center wasn't about building a new training center for police and fire, although, of course, that's what they needed. It was all about the fact that after the summer protests in 2020 and COVID, all that, crime spiked out of control in this country. And it went up 63% in Atlanta in 6 months, which you've never seen that before. So the building of the training center, first and foremost, was about restoring morale, retention, recruitment, hiring, and training to the police officers in the city and restoring confidence in the citizens of Atlanta that public safety is a priority. And that was part of the strategy. I stood up at the grand opening of the training center with the mayor and governor and others. And I said, what I'm most happy about is not the fact that we've accomplished this incredible feat to build this incredible facility, but I'm most happy about the strategy has worked. Now, all of a sudden, residents of Atlanta have confidence in public safety. They feel like the city's getting safer. Violent crime's down 35% in the last 2 years. The applications to be an Atlanta police officer have gone up 1,500% in 24 months. Hiring has gone up 100%. We are putting more police officers on the streets, more police officers in neighborhoods than ever before. Duncan, the strategy is working, and that is so exciting to see it happen in our city. And we are trending back now toward this momentum that's putting us into this new strategic plan that we're getting ready to launch. By 2018, we believe the city of Atlanta will be the safest city in America, full stop. And so if we just stay on that projection, and so we're excited about all that. There's a lot of programs that go into this plan, cameras across the city, Crime Stoppers Network, housing for officers, training for officers, and all kind of other programs. But probably the most important program we have is called At Promise. And that's a flip or a play on the word at risk. You hear so much folks talking about at-risk youth. But let me just briefly say what At Promise is. When young men and women get in trouble, commit a felony crime in the United States, the recidivism rate is 70 to 90%. Now that's scary. That means once they get in trouble, they're going to end up either dead or in prison or in and out of the criminal justice system the next 30 years. So that ought to be the first thing and the last thing all of us talk about when we talk about making our city safer. We have got to find a way to change the trajectory of these young people. In 2017, we did a study and found that the recidivism rate in Fulton County, city of Atlanta, was 88%. Now that's tragic. That's tragic. So we created the idea, if we built these diversion centers around the city, led by the Police Foundation, and we invite the Boys and Girls Clubs and the YMCAs and the Urban Leagues and all of them to work in these centers. Police Foundation takes on all the liability, takes on all the responsibility for the fundraising. And then we have the judges, the court system, the school system, everyone to send the kids there that have gotten into trouble. Kid's been arrested for a felony, they send him there. If a kid's been expelled from the school system, they send him there. And all this is with the intent to say, we use these wraparound services and we can have an impact to change the trajectory of these kids. And the last thing I'll say, Duncan, is I am incredibly proud to say not only have we created a model that's not seen anywhere else in the country. Imagine that 88% recidivism rate we said we started with. We've had over 3,000 kids go through the At Promise centers right now. And the recidivism rate of those kids is 5.9%.
The multiplier effect is huge. The multiplier
So,
effect is
so
huge.
those numbers almost seem like they're contrived or made up because they're so hard to even get your arms around. But it just goes to show the kid's got in trouble. If you take him by the hand, and put your arms around him and give him the help that he or she needs, and really work toward getting them the education, the mental health, the training, the love, for lack of a better, they need, and then
Get them
send
away
them out the
from the
door
wrong
with a
element.
job. And then in many cases, we've even had their criminal history expunged. So think about changing that kid's trajectory. Now he's got a full-time job without a criminal history. And so that is the most important work that we do. It's the most expensive work we do, but we also have a lot of donors and supporters that lean in very heavily to help us.
It's just outstanding. We've taken so much of your time. Let me ask you what our retirement spy audience may want to know. And that is a funny question. Dave, if you were not at the Atlanta Police Foundation now and it was behind you, and we're using the phase 2 word in your life, which would you is probably phase 3 or retirement, where would you be in your day in and day out enjoying yourself in the phase 2?
Well, that's an easy one. I'm a sports junkie. I like to play golf and every kind of sport and follow sports in every way. So I'd be attending a lot of sports functions. But I own a horse ranch and I race Tennessee walking horses and I ride them just every chance that I get. So the day I eventually retire from the second time, as you said it, from the Atlanta Police Foundation, then of course I will literally ride off into the sunset.
That's epic. And what a great ending for our episode today. Dave, you're a hero. Thank you so much for all that you've done. We hope to be able to pull you back in the future and talk more progress about what phase 2 is like or phase 3 may be for you in the future. Thank you so much for your time today.
Well, thank you for doing the podcast, Duncan. I've enjoyed being with you. I appreciate it.